people used to look at me like I was completely crazy. Like, where does this lunatic come from? That in a place where there's only one God, that is whiskey. Why does this crazy guy think he can actually make wine here and that anybody is going to be interested in drinking it? I must say, I look back with pride that it was a successful IPO. And for a couple of years, it was great.
So walk us through the first ever wine produced.
I went over to Crawford Market, bought myself a carboy, a filter, this, that, and the other, some yeast, and found somebody who had some table grapes and fermented myself a batch at home first. That would have been around, I guess, 95, 96, something like that. But I was sort of a co-author, you can say, of Maharashtra's wine policy, which was called, they couldn't use the term wines, they called it the grape processing policy of 2001. And we built India's first wine tourism operation, which today is huge for Sula. And without that part of the business, this business would not survive.
What prevents us from being a 10x industry? Armed with a degree from Stanford, Rajeev had no background in farming, viticulture, which by the way is the study of grape cultivation, or the alcohol industry. Yet he walked away from his job at Oracle in Silicon Valley, choosing instead to grow grapes in a region where wine was barely understood, let alone consumed. Over the next 2 decades, Rajeev not only built India's largest and most loved wine brand, he helped create the Indian wine industry itself, pushing for friendlier policies, educating consumers, and making wine more accessible, affordable, and proudly local. From planting the first Sauvignon Blancs to hosting 14,000 people at Sula Fest, his journey is a masterclass in patience, conviction, and cultural transformation. Today, we unpack the incredible journey, the trials, the tribulations, and the turning points of what put India on the global wine map. The challenges on that. That's what entrepreneurs love to listen. What are the darkest moments of that journey, whatever you can remember?
Sure. So, but I must say that even at school, I was always a bit of I wouldn't use the term lone wolf, but I was always sort of out there on my own in terms of my thoughts and things that I was working on, etc., etc.
Yeah.
I was always a bit of a maverick.
Yeah.
So I always had a big group of friends, but also I was a little bit out there on my own in the way that I thought about things. I found that other people didn't necessarily think in the same way. And so for me, it's never been a problem that I'm like sort of out there, sort of alone fighting that battle. In fact, I thrive on it to a large extent. But definitely over the times, what I needed was friends, mentors, etc. So I found Kerry Damsky in California, who became my mentor here and who, has been on board for 20 years, 25 years. He was part of the journey. He taught me everything that I knew about wine. And then my team over here, of course, I have, very good relations with all of them. So I haven't felt, in recent times, I would say that alone. But definitely in the early days, people used to look at me like I was completely crazy. Like, where does this lunatic come from? And why does he think that in a place where there's only one God, that is whiskey?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm talking about in my sphere. No, this thing's to anyone.
Yeah.
But why does this crazy guy think he can actually make wine here and that anybody is going to be interested in drinking it? But I persevered. I found a couple of politicians and a couple of bureaucrats who were very interested when I mentioned that the world's richest rural regions are all wine regions. So that was my tagline from day one. And that was the truth.
That is a great tagline.
If you think about Napa Valley, Bordeaux, Tuscany, the Cape area of South Africa, all of these areas, they are all wine regions. Provence, it's a wine region. And when I said that, and I said, we have this natural bounty here of grapes, and we're really missing something by having so much excise duty and making it so difficult to open a winery.
Yeah.
It was almost impossible to get a license to open a winery. And I went there saying, let's deregulate. No, for myself, but also for this industry. Let this industry grow. Let 1,000 wineries come up. That's what we went out there for. So it's a matter of pride for me that I was sort of a co-author, you can say, of Maharashtra's wine policy, which was called, they couldn't use the term wines, they called it the grape processing policy of 2001, which was groundbreaking. And then Karnataka followed a couple years ago. And it was sort of the big bang of wine in India that they just said, okay, come on in, put up your wineries. We got 100, down the road, we got 100% FDI notified. It was 0 FDI, then 24, 49. When Mr. Pawar was agriculture minister, I went to Delhi. I said, what's up? Call the gentleman in charge of DPIT or whatever, DIIP, whatever. He's like, what's the problem here? This is wine. This is not defense.
Yeah.
And we got 100% FDI notified. So, which then meant Mohit Chandon set up a factory here down the road, etc. So a lot of cool stuff, which I'm very, very happy when I look back on that. Couple of years at least.
I'm sure. Farming itself is an annualized business.
Absolutely. You don't know, but I was looking around trying to think, thinking that what you have to do is something distinct or something unique, and it has to involve processing of some kind. So these things I understood that. Otherwise, forget about trying to farm in India.
Yeah.
And then I realized that Nashik was in fact one of the biggest grape growing regions in the world, but 100% table fruit, eating fruit and raisins. Not a single wine grape in entire Nashik district. And, if the rest of the world, basically 95% plus of grapes are used for wine. Less than 5% are used for eating and raisins. And here, 100% of the grapes were being used for. And then
that was the aha moment.
I had an aha moment. I had an epiphany. I had started drinking a little bit of wine in California.
Yeah.
Though I was probably more preferential to gin and tonics at that time, even 30 years ago, whatever long it was.
Yeah.
And I said, India does not make good wine. And why should this not be the case? So I said, okay, I'm going to be the person to make the first drinkable, decent wine in India that we can be proud of.
Switching gears a bit, it seems like your first equity believer was our common friend, Deepak Shahdat.
Absolutely.
And he stuck, with you for all the way to the IPO. What did he see?
And he's still on board.
Okay.
He's still on board. Yeah.
Amazing. What did he see that nobody else did? And were you surprised by even getting equity funding back then, institutional equity?
Yeah, well, we met. He had gone to INSEAD with a friend of mine, and the whole group came over to India, and I led the trip to Goa.
Okay.
And we bonded. We had a great time, and we realized we were so, sort of well-matched, and we became instant fast friends. And then he told me that he was getting, he had left his previous sort of corporate life behind, getting into venture capital. It was an extremely interesting time, and he was very excited to invest. He saw India as an amazing sunrise happening, and he was looking for small consumer brands to invest in India. And I had never heard that until then. He was probably the first VC that I got to know personally. And he thought I was crazy when I told him at that time that I'm looking to build a winery, because I think I had not even produced the first bottle then.
Okay.
We brought out our first bottle. We made it in 99 and sold it in 2000. I needed 1 year to get the permissions from the government to sell that bottle, by the way. Just imagine the lows that I went to at that time. You were asking about lows. That was a very low time.
Yeah.
98, 99, 2000, trying to get the state government to give us the license, etc. It was crazy. But so Deepak came, saw, he thought I was crazy, but then he said, okay, he tasted the first wine. He said, wow. This is amazing. And then I think about a year after that, after we produced our first wine, in about 2002, we started talking. 2003, we signed the paper. So it was way, way early on in the journey of VCs and PE.
Correct.
I think PE was not yet a word there.
Yeah.
It was VCs.
Yeah.
And VCs investing into small consumer brands in India. Deepak might have been the first.
Yeah, it was very, very early, very prescient. And of course, long, patient wait.
Yeah, I wish I had better counsel at that time. I always look back and think, Deepak, I gave you probably too much of the company at first shot.
It was brutal. Valuations were brutal pre-2010.
Right.
I think the world of venture changed in favor
But we needed the money. We were ready to grow so fast. We had got then the regulations changed.
Yeah.
And I just saw this bonanza. And Deepak said to me, you need the money. You can't borrow anymore at 18%.
No,
this money is free.
As you said,
he said, you need this money to grow.
That way, but eventually.
Don't give up this moment. Yeah. So we said, okay, fine. I signed on. We took it. We never looked back. And we grew exponentially. We had double-digit growth years, which in wine is very difficult. And I think it was the right thing to do.
What are those moments of self-doubt in those stories? And what were the breakthroughs that compensate for that? Because that's what an entrepreneur needs. Every given week or a month, you need offsetting good news, bad news.
Yes, very much so. Yeah. So, I'd say it's a bit unfortunate that these days people see so many of these stories where it's almost like a get rich quick, that somebody started with an idea on day one, and in year 3 already, it's a unicorn, etc., etc. That is extremely rare, and that's really drummed up to such a large extent by our media. They are so hungry for those stories that it's sort of splashed all over the place. You don't realize that some of the most lasting stories and the ones which have really created are 20-year-old, 30-year-old stories. And as you said, it takes 10 years for this first thing. So we struggled in our first decade, never had enough cash in the bank, always needed fresh sources of funds to help us grow. But we were very good about it, that we were frugal, we bootstrapped. We always said we want to show a profit at the end of the day. And early on, in fact, we were showing a profit after tax, which is extremely rare these days. And we always
seen as a bad thing nowadays.
Nowadays, you see it, you have eyeballs, etc.
You need to grow faster than you can make profits.
Absolutely. But I would say at least to get to a positive EBITDA margin, I've always felt that, if you're not getting there within, like, say, 2-3 years after starting, probably it might not be. I mean, obviously you have those stories.
When you build the foundations of a startup on debt and borrowed money, you have no choice.
Absolutely. Very true.
If you have deep pockets of equity, then you can keep saying, I can get more equity buyers.
Sure.
And postpone that event for 10 years.
Sure.
Which is what venture capital tries to give you.
Yeah. And, VC and private equity mavens know they have a much bigger, exposure and a much bigger, larger viewpoint. So they can see parallels there that, might be different, where they say, look, this has a clear parallel to something else where it's okay for the first 5 years if you're not EBITDA positive, for example. But in my school, which is a bit old school, I must say, it takes time. It's a journey of love, of labor, of love's labor, you can say. And it really takes time. And I think EBITDA positive and then having a path to profitability, having an eye on ratios like ROC, etc., very basic stuff is important.
Why do you think that happened? It's just like people sat at home and reflected and sipped wine and became more aware.
Yeah, well, it could be that. And, we also really reinvented our business during that time. We went through a very tough time in the early years of COVID. I mean, India and South Africa were the only 2 countries that shut down all Alcobev sales for a few months. We were really caught, we were hit hard by that.
You had to line up outside liquor shops in circles.
Yeah, and then our hotels, our resorts were shut down for 6 months.
Hospitality business.
So there was no money coming in. Banks were calling. Luckily, we got some support from the government in terms of. But what we realized was, with limited cash flow, we wanted to focus only on those revenue lines that were the most profitable and made the most sense long term, rather than with playing around with so many things. So we slashed our imported brands business, which we realized at the end of the day was taking up a lot of cash flow and was not giving us much profitability at the end of the day. So we had a big portfolio. We were one of the largest wine importers in India, one of the top 5. And we just stepped back and we just walked away from that business.
Yeah, interesting. You would have thought that would have been a hedge, but that turned out to be the thing you had to shed.
Absolutely. And the other thing we said was that Indians want to drink well-made Indian wine at $1,000. And our whole focus at that time was about 700, 800.
That's correct. You've always stayed true to that price and value.
We created the Source.
Yes.
Which has been
lovely brand. I buy it every time I see it.
Huge hit. Yeah. We realized that we were losing some of our customers from our Sula, classic Sula range to imported wines.
Yeah.
And we said we have to come back with something where we take them head on. We are not going to hide and try to hide behind high import duties, etc. We got to get ready for the big bang, and we got to get ready. And we came out with the Source, our Provence style Grenache Rosé was our first wine there. Huge hit. And that's been our biggest hit of the last, decade. And it all came up. It was the brainchild during COVID.
We're hearing cackling and laughter and joy this morning, even middle of the day.
Yeah, we've done so much cool stuff here.
Yeah. So what, when did that, was that again the Rajeev Samant maverick who comes up with all these ideas?
It was also part of the Californian stint. When I happened to go up to see Robert Mondavi in Napa, the father of wine tourism, you can say, in the world.
Yes.
Later on, by the way, figured out that he was also a Stanford graduate.
Oh, fantastic.
So there was an article on me in the Stanford magazine called the Mondavi of Mumbai. So I thought that was pretty.
That's
and
very cool.
his thing was really simple. You got to bring people to your winery. You got to make it a beautiful place where people are really happy and thrilled to go, and they leave as your brand ambassadors for life. That's the simple concept. That's what we worked on. We got the rules again changed for that, and we built India's first wine tourism operation, which today is huge for Sula. And without that part of the business, this business would not survive, leave alone thrive.
Yeah.
You know, we have 3.5 lakh visitors a year.
That's a one
amazing.
population advantage
It's
of India.
amazing. I mean, obviously, I never thought, looking back, that we would be the biggest, the most visited vineyard in the world. So these kinds of milestones are what keeps you.
It's like the Tirupati of wine.
These are, you can say, there's some parallel, which keep you really happy to keep on saying, I have really done something here. I've done something which is going to be remembered, which is going to go down in history.
It's remarkable.
And there's still so much left to do.
The first time I came here, I was so surprised. Like, I hadn't been here till 5 years ago.
Right.
And then when I landed here, I was like, whoa, this is something. And I've not been to too many wineries overseas.
Right.
So it did take me by surprise, just the scale and just the crowd, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And as you said, I think you've made marketeers for life.
Yeah.
Because there's nobody else who can market it other than your customers, actually.
Right. And there's nobody else who's done this. So we have this fantastic advantage. We are 3.5 hours now with Samruddhi. It's even better. Yeah. But we're a 3.5 hour drive from I think 25 million potential consumers. Yeah. Nobody else has anything like this in the world.
Cut over to suddenly you decide to go IPO finally.
Right.
And it's not easy for both an F&B company and especially in alcohol to there's
especially a little bit of stigma. Especially in wine.
Wine and, even I know shareholders who say, I won't buy those stocks. And what finally was that moment? What gave you courage? And what is those 3 years of post-IPO felt like? Does it feel like the right decision? I know you didn't need money. I think this was all offer for sale, right? You didn't raise money, I think.
That's right. Me personally, yeah.
Yeah. So what was the thought process about doing it finally? And what does that 2-3 year journey feel like? Because now, finally, we're seeing Indian startup entrepreneurs, much like yourself, but much younger, finally getting the courage to say, hey, we can keep building this for 10, 20 years. Who's to stop us?
Sure.
So, and that public is a good inflection point.
Sure. So this was a joint decision.
Okay.
After Deepak, we had a series of private equity investors. And then finally, Whirl Invest, who came on board a long time ago saying that, we're going to be long-term. We'll be on board for at least 5 years. 14 years later, we sat down. They said, Rajeev, we've enjoyed the journey. And we did. We had a great relationship during that time. Hats off to them. They said, it's time.
Yeah,
it's time for us to exit. We've been on board 14 years. That's way, way, way longer than we'd ever thought.
Yeah.
We have to exit. And frankly speaking, IPO is going to be the best way for us to realize the kind of valuation. At this point, to try to bring on a strategic, etc., probably not going to go. You guys, we'd already been working on our compliance, on our governance, etc.
Yeah.
Already was top notch. She said, you guys are almost ready. Let's do this. So I said, sure, let's do this. I must say that I had a secondary role in the decision.
Yeah.
The primary decision was our private equity guys, who at that point had close to 50% equity in the company, and mine was less than 25%. So and they had a tag and drag, and so you know what all that means.
Yeah.
So but I didn't argue. I said, sure, let's do this. It's the next stage, and so we went public December 22. Yeah. Very difficult time when you look back.
Yes.
23 became a much better time after about sort of,
there was a slump in 22. Yeah.
Yes. So after the second half of 23 was a bonanza and 24 was a bonanza. But late 22, we were gutsy. We went out there. Didn't necessarily get the valuation that we were expecting at the beginning. But then looking back, the bankers also know a thing or two.
Yeah.
And when you talk about consumer, etc., bread and butter consumer, not tech and, fintech and all that, they know what they're talking about. So when I look back, I say, hey, they weren't so wrong.
Equalizes over a period of time. Anyway.
Absolutely. They weren't so wrong in terms of valuation. And I must say, I look back with pride that it was a successful IPO. And for a couple of years, it was great. Because our private equity guys all got off. I did not. I've stayed
Always
on.
Happens,
Yeah. I probably have a 1% or 2% less stake than I did at that time. So now I'm very much the primary shareholder, the promoter.
Yeah.
Looking back, would I have, for a wine company, does it make sense to be public? I think the jury's out on that.
Okay.
I think the jury's out on that. But were we in a position to continue going for some time? At the end of the day, a company has to go by the decisions of its board, of its main shareholders, et cetera, et cetera. And so, that was a pact we had made with I won't say that. But, back then, that was the pact, that when you take money from private equity, then the exit happens when the private equity wants it to happen.
Yeah,
and hence, so we went public. Looking back, I'm not sure that wine companies are 100% suited in that thing, because to show quarterly results,
very tough.
When you have projects, you have a wine under development right now that's going to take 5 years from the time.
2-3 year product development cycles, and you're actually
then you find yourself sometimes thinking of shortcuts, etc., which is not for the best when you're building a long-term brand. So you got to grit it out when the times are a bit tougher. Know that what you're doing is going to pay off in the medium long term. Have your eyes on that prize and just stick with it.
Given what you know of this journey, and I know you love everything you've built, but if you were starting in 2025, would Rajeev Samant do this all over again?
Vineyard, I'm not sure I would.
Yeah.
Today it's become much harder. When I went there, I was totally naive, wide eyes,
all
wide open, naive. And like boom, boom. Now I think, I'd probably be looking more towards like fintech or something. I mean, wow, you have such little to lose there. In little time also. You can do your concept, proof of concept, etc. Get up and running. Couple of years, something doesn't work, you move, you morph. Here, it's a life commitment.
Yeah, it is.
It's a life commitment. I have been so fortunate. I look back sometimes, it's like, wow, what did I do? Why did I do? I'm like, wow, what a life, you've had, I've had. So wouldn't trade it for anything.
Our season partner, Ultrahuman, is back for a second time. I'm biased as the seed investor here, but their immensely loved brand is making waves globally. Ultrahuman is a health tech pioneer redefining how we track and improve our health. Their sleek titanium ring air and its new rare metal cousins accurately track sleep, movement, and recovery to deliver real-time health insights and personalized nudges. Ultrahuman is creating a unique health ecosystem built on top of the wearable data. It just launched Blood Vision in the US in addition to India, a blood testing service that offers a panel of over 100 longevity and chronic disease biomarkers with the convenience of an at-home test. They're also launching Ultrahuman Home globally for environment-aware analysis and sleep insights. Whatever your health fix, go sign up and experience being truly Ultrahuman. Our seasoned partner, IDFC First Bank, has earned its reputation as one of India's most startup-friendly banks through its First Wings program, which provides dedicated mentorship and tailored financial solutions to help early-stage ventures scale effectively. Coincidentally, many of Blume's portfolio companies, much later stage, also partner with IDFC First Bank for their banking and financial needs. If you're well-funded and scaling, there are great lending and banking partners, and our portfolio companies would attest to that.